This BOF Live is brought to you in partnership with Saks, the premier digital platform for luxury fashion. Driven by a mission to help customers express themselves through relevant and inspiring style, Saks serves as a destination to explore and discover the latest from established and emerging designers. Learn more at Saks.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome back to BOF Live, everyone. In recent weeks, the luxury segment has seemed like the last hope of the retail economy that is under pressure as high-end sales beat estimates and managers projected confidence for the coming months despite a darkening macroeconomic picture. Signs of trouble may be ahead, but data, particularly as data from the three biggest credit card operators, show that US consumers' expenditure on luxury is softening, and they've really driven the stellar recovery that the luxury industry has experienced. But concurrent to that volatility, the number of ultra high net worth individuals has increased by 9.3% globally between 2020 and 2021, with an even greater increase expected this year, according to Knight Frank. And what's more, the global online luxury goods market, which reached approximately 38 billion in 2019, is still expected to more than triple in 5 years to reach 120 billion as we enter 2025, according to Bain's luxury goods report. So, the opportunity remains, but forging a strong connection to the consumer cohort that drives the most profitability is critical, more so than ever before. And today's wealthiest consumers are shopping online with a new set of expectations, prioritizing experiences that are engaging, that are efficient, and that are personalized to them and their needs, and those which offer really an emotional connection to their brands. So this session today is designed to help retailers, executives, and entrepreneurs to navigate some of these new waters that we find ourselves in. And we're really going to be discussing what the future of customer engagement in luxury e-commerce looks like. So what does excellence look like today? And how can companies attract and engage luxury consumers? To answer that question, I'm delighted to be joined by two experts in their field. Kristin Maa is SVP of Growth at Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks website and app provide an access to professional stylists today. There's editorial content, there's interactive events using individuals from the industry, combining online experiences with the existing network of Saks stores through an exclusive partnership. And Kristin joined the company from Hudson's Bay Company, and before that was at McKinsey. Kristin, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us also is Lydia Pang, the co-founder and CEO of Mørning, and Mørning FYI, and she is an expert in the future consumer and how to talk to them. Lydia's worked with Calvin Klein, Nike, Margiela, Instagram. She's had roles at Refinery 29 and MC Saatchi, and she's renowned for her insight on what motivates Gen Z consumers as the millennial age of idealism gives way to the Gen Z era of realism, and her direct appraisal of what's required to speak to that consumer cohort meaningfully. Hi, Lydia.
Hi there.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Excited.
So before we get going, some very brief housekeeping. If you do have any questions, we'll answer as many as we can. Please do put them into the Q&A function in front of you and save the chat for chat. I will go through those questions and incorporate them into the conversation where we think best fitting, or save them to the end. But we will keep them to the conversation that's being discussed today. So with that out of the way, in contrast to 2021, growth this year is coming from luxury consumers, from high spenders, and I'd love to hear from both of you what you believe the future of luxury consumer engagement looks like as at a top line. Kristin, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think the future of luxury engagement really is going to be about customization, and customization that's dictated by the consumer. So a customer being able to make choices, express themselves, and experience brands more in the way that they want to, and not just in the way that the brand wants to push themselves out. And along with that, I think there's going to be more of an expectation for two-way communication, where brands are listening as much as they're kind of pushing out content, and they're responding, adapting, and trying to adjust and be part of a community rather than have the consumers just come to them.
And is there anything that you believe is unique to the type of retailer that Saks is in this future engagement?
Yeah, I do think there is. I think as a multi-brand retailer, we really have the ability to curate different things for different people, maybe more than a mono brand, because we're able to put things together aesthetically from different price points, from different styles, use cases, occasions. And so I think we're able to respond a little bit better and bring some of those things in and make those connections for customers so that they're able to find what they want.
Lydia, luxury is increasingly driven by younger and younger consumers, and that consumer cohort, coincidentally also happens to be one that is defined by individualism, that has really balks at being considered types of cohorts. What do you think the future of engaging such a varied group of individuals looks like, and what excellence looks like?
I mean, I echo everything that Kristin said, and I also think the key thing here is emotional connection and realism. I think luxury and culture and like kind of the world has been cracked open like an egg and is super fragile. The consumer has no time or energy for smoke and mirrors, insincere interactions, or brands who are not sort of funding or supporting their values in a sustained way. And I think luxury as a category, its definition has never been so abstract or liminal, or frankly, in the hands of the community to define as they see fit day to day. Like I think about Balenciaga and like deleting their feed and hiding drops and ignoring algorithm hacks and keeping the community very on their toes. And this sort of feral behavior has become the new taste of luxury. And I think we love it. We love how self-aware it is. It keeps us feeling present. And we're co-creating that narrative, which exactly to Kristin's point is like the expectation now. I think luxury has always been powerful and escapist, but now we're in this like era of intense realism, and so we're being held to these really high standards, which is an exciting opportunity when we think about customer engagement. It looks like brands interrogating their values intimately and then imbuing the digital ecosystem they have with those values and providing true utility to the customer. So to sum it up, I suppose what I'm saying is like transparency, access, purpose is kind of the definition of the present. And I think the future will push brands to their edge of fallibility. And the ones that are open to that will win ultimately, I think.
And are there any areas, we talk about consumer engagement and the dialogue that you've both mentioned so much, but are there any areas where consumers are coming together to feed back into the system in new and more exciting ways? I mean, I know consumers are retreating to different parts of the internet. We talk about Web3 and the emergence of that, but in the here and now, what excites you most about the cultural feedback that's feeding back into luxury or retailers today?
Kristin, did you want to go? I can.
Sure. Sorry, that was for you, Lydia.
I would say probably what I'm finding most exciting is like the kind of corners of the internet that you wouldn't expect those conversations to be happening, like, WhatsApp groups or the comment section now, I think on Web2 social is like where everything is happening. Like those are really authentic interactions. That's where true feedback is for the brand, and also like debate and dialogue around product and around access and around their demands, like what they want. And so I feel like the comment section is like a really important space that we often disregard. I feel like we've always disregarded the value of community managers and copywriting. It's always a visual platform, but actually that's where all the like gems are. That's where all the information is, I think.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
I think we find comments. We've always read comments. It used to be a place, for customer complaints sometimes if someone wants to air a grievance. And so that's really important from a customer service perspective. But even more so now, I think there's a lot of dialogue happening there. And we've started to jump in on other comment threads where it's not our posts. It's particularly on like TikTok, where there's a lot of conversation, a lot of richness, to your point, in the comments, where we're saying, this post relates to something about Saks, something that's relevant for us. And so we want to join that conversation and be a part of it other places.
So we've already mentioned, individuality and the importance of customization and really speaking to consumers as individuals. And Kristin, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts that actually enable you to do that, and how you actually plan your data strategy in building a sort of 360-degree view of your customers. So could you tell me a little bit about how you do that both on and offline, and what the key insights are from it?
Yeah, sure. So I do think the on and offline is very important for us, and can be, it's unique, the relationship that we have with the Saks Fifth Avenue stores, so that we can really think about the customer first. And I think that's what we try to organize all of our work around in this space is what's the best for the customer, and how do we help to meet them where they want, when they want, how they want to shop, and not try to steer them in one direction or another. So we do have visibility into what they're browsing online, what they're shopping online, and what they're shopping in stores as well. And so, we all know that customers often will shop browse online, buy in store, and vice versa. And so the fact that we can kind of stitch that together and provide a more seamless experience, where we're helping them to really pick up where they left off, one place to another, which I think is helpful for the customer. So we take all of this information that we're sort of gathering on customers and their behaviors, and it helps us to understand what preferences are. So not just, one customer and what brands and categories, et cetera, that they like, what their engagement preferences are, but also helps us look at what customers are likely to like if we were to introduce them. So we have so many brands on our website, and I think often people just haven't discovered something yet. And it's a real service to customers when we can say, okay, we know this person likes these brands and these categories. A lot of people who like those also like these other brands, and let's make sure that we're introducing those brands and serving them up, so that if that is something that's interesting to a customer, they've now found one of their new favorites. And it's when I talk to people I meet who have learned I work at Saks, I love when people say to me, oh, I found this new brand at Saks and now it's my favorite. I think that's a huge value that we can add to customers. And so it's one of my favorite things to hear. But we're able to take that information and not just serve it up on our content, but also share it with stylists. So we have online and in-store stylists who are working with a lot of our customers, and we can help provide them visibility into what the customer might be interested in as well. So they can kind of make that meaningful connection for their customer if it's not something that they would have thought of necessarily.
I think we've, it's been clear in the market where if you use customer data for their benefit and create a service, ever since the Amazon recommends another book that you may like service, there's been clear standout areas where consumers have really been very willing to enter into that exchange of data for service. But now I think we're really entering to a new era in terms of how we're viewing privacy. On the one hand, you have regulators that are taking it seriously for the first time, even beyond the European Union. Additionally, you have tech giants like Apple really viewing this as a battleground to the extent that they're trying to sort of take ownership of privacy as a competitive advantage in consumer sentiment. Lydia, some of this, the better we know consumers, the more individually that we can speak to them is fundamentally built by the data set that we can gather on them. How would you advise businesses to be transparent about that, or how would you advise businesses to navigate that? The service will improve the more data you can get.
Yeah, I feel like you hit the nail on the head there with transparency. I feel like that is the key and core of it, and utility. I think the choice needs to be in the hands of the consumer, and the focus for brands around the education of the benefits to them, like Kristin just said, around discovery. And it is a long game play, I think, that trust. We need to kind of unpick and explain how it will improve their experience of being served, and the connection to the brand ultimately. Like, how is it a two-sided experience and co-authored by community and brand? But I think on that as well, like, we are seeing a big swing back towards curation on social, like people being more considered versus that social transience, like photo dumps and oversharing. And I think it's because people are more protective now of their content and their personal lives. And, we're inherently more private and more protective. I read the other day, like, social is free because we're the product. And I think people are wising up to that fact. And so therefore they want to co-author any of those interactions. And I think specifically with regards to e-com, I think there's a lot to be said for brands showing the edges of the kind of beautiful, imperfect seams of a digital experience sometimes, like that healthy human friction that keeps us really honest and connected to the brand. And the fact that sometimes it is more of a transactional or product moment, that's fine. Like, just say that. So yeah, I think retailers have an opportunity to lead the way in innovating this space on behalf of the consumer first. So if we're designing these journeys with the consumer needs in mind and iterating and evolving it with them, again, that fallibility word that I'm going to come back to, I think the audience is much more then collaborative and open about what they want. And then it's like that two-sided dialogue, which I think is obviously gold. That's the goal.
Gold for you, Kristin, I'm sure.
Yes.
And how do you treat your social channels? I mean, we see social commerce growing, you know, at a much faster rate than e-commerce in the US and China, especially. But you know, what's the benefit you typically derive from your social channels, be it social commerce or as a listening place?
For us, I think it is primarily a listening place. Of course, it's a place for us to put out content. And I think, you know, as there are more and more ways for people to find content, more places where we can interact. I think, you know, over the last couple of years, we have continued to join more and more of these platforms and taken a minute to really understand how do communities engage on these platforms and what's the way that Saks really fits in here, and not try to put the same sort of branding content in all channels and just post it and put it there and see what happens, but to really adapt our strategy to be a part of the community. And I think there's more opportunity there, you know, with Web3 communities and thinking about all of the places we can go there. I think that's what we'll continue to look at, is how can we join communities and sort of bring value, be a part of it, rather than just putting content there and sort of backing off to see what happens, which I think is like the very early phase of how we treated social as sort of brands.
For sure. I want to bring the conversation back to something that we know is critical now, and that's personalization. I want to stay with you, Kristin, and just ask you, you know, from a retailer's perspective, from both a commercial perspective, but almost from a consumer psyche perspective, why is personalization so important, and what are the best in class practices that you can share as to how you can utilize AI learning and some of the, you know, the great tools that we have at our disposal now, but also maintain this human touch and valuability that, you know, Lydia's talking about?
Sure. Yeah, I think, you know, there really is not just one way, one ideal, one set of trends. I think that's something that, you know, fashion and luxury have really moved from this is how everyone should dress, this is the fashion, to so many options for people. And it's really about how do we help people express themselves and build on their identities rather than how do we tell them what to wear. We've really moved past that. And I think that does make personalization so much more important because there are so many versions of what people want to see. So, you know, this is something we can leverage as a multi-brand retailer. We have a lot of brands and products to work with, but it means making content that sort of speaks to different people, different aesthetics. We want people to be able to sort of see themselves and identify with the content that we're putting out, which means creating more sets of content with different people and different looks, and then personalizing what we're serving to people as much as we can. So we've really moved for an email, for example, today, there is at least some element of personalization in about 90% of the emails that we send, which is very different from a few years ago. It was probably 10% or so. So we've really ramped that up because we know the more relevant that we can be, the more valuable it is for customers to see the content. And so kind of getting into like the nuts and bolts of a little bit of how we do that. I mentioned the information that we gather on customers and then how we sort of extrapolate off of that. So we're using data science to fill in a lot of blanks in terms of what we think customers might be interested in, you know, both in terms of their brand and category behavior, but also how they want to engage, how often they want to engage, and things like that. So we call that our customer DNA internally. And so we're using those to marry with the actions that they're taking. So an example would be, you know, I add something to my wish list or my wait list. Saks is out of stock. Unfortunately, we've sold out of something. And so I might say, I really like that. And I'm going to add it to my wait list in case it comes back in stock, I'll be notified. But we know that fashion sort of moves on a lot of times. And so there are styles that we never get more of because it's completely sold through. And so kind of thinking about how a stylist would help someone, how you would help someone, you know, an actual person rather than a website. How would you help them? You would say, well, I know you love this. Let's look at everything about this product and say, are there other ones that we have that might fit the need. You obviously want a bag, and you want, a bag of this color, maybe this price point, this style. And how do we make other suggestions that are really helpful to say, we don't know if this is going to come back in stock and you're looking for a bag, so let's help you find some options that are pretty similar to that. So I think a lot of this personalization, it's everything from the content to kind of being that stylist, being a person who can help someone find what they're looking for, and using the information we have to be helpful in that way. And then we're also editorializing or personalizing our editorial content. So we have started testing some new formats like digest emails, where we can wrap together a lot of the different things that we know are important to a customer in one email. Everyone loves a digest, and all of the key facts. As we get more and more emails, we have to be able to be distinct. So we have some of these personalized newsletters, which bring in different things that we know about a customer. It's, what are their favorite brands that have new arrivals? What are edit articles, which are sort of the editorial content articles that we have on our site? What are some of the new ones of those that they might be interested in, and kind of pulling that all together for them. And then I think the last thing, which I think, Lydia, you touched on a little bit on that co-creation, is we've developed more ways for them to tell us what their preferences are. So we like most brands, have an ability to wish list, which is like, I like this product, and we're saving that as a customer and letting the brand know we like that. But we also have something that we've called the preference center, where in someone's account, they can save their favorite brands, their favorite categories, and their sizes as well, so that they're telling us, these are the things that I care about, even if, that might not be what we've gathered on a customer, and that might not be what we think. But if they can tell us what brands they care about and what brands they don't care about, then that helps us to provide more relevant content for them. They can also filter. So it creates a filter for them, so that, if you're searching or not searching, if you're looking at new arrivals, you can just filter your favorite brands as one click, so that you're kind of customizing the arrays on the site to be just what you're interested in seeing.
Lydia, picking up on this co-authorship point and echoing Brennan's question in the Q&A section, when we think about how important, well, first of all, I'd like to ask you why personalization is so important today from a consumer sentiment perspective. And secondly, are there any best practices or any insights you can share about co-authorship and creating dialogues to enable brands to listen?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Kristin mentioned there is kind of around this idea of it being intuitive. And I think that's also really key, because I honestly think that personalization right now is like table stakes, because individualism is inherently about respecting the customer. And I think because, the internet has democratized access to products, narrative now and craft is more critical than ever before. And I spent years January 29 before I started my own agency, and we used to build like editorial worlds around shopping experiences, giving them a lot of story and meaning. But we would also give the audience the tools, not necessarily like rules for what they needed to do. And I always thought that distinction was really interesting. Like, we would never sell unless we did just sell, and it was about that, and it was a very honest transactional moment versus cloaking it in something apparently deeper. And I think there's some interesting, when we think about co-authorship and integrity, it was honest and in service of the audience's ask. So really it's about context and respect. And I think, we're in a different place now societally. The customer rightly demands to be seen and heard as an individual. And so for brands, the big consideration is this idea of context being conscious, because we have a responsibility as, marketers and brands, big, powerful platforms of influence, to advance culture with those decisions and with our power over contexts that people consume the brand. So yeah, I think context needs to be more strategically and consciously thought through, more honest. Like, we should never cloak intention or let a brand mission moment conflate or sit too tightly next to a product pushing moment. I think when the two sit too closely together, actually, it feels without explanation, it feels ick and a little disrespectful. And so we owe the consumer better than that. And I would say that, as we push further into a world of personalization, how can we challenge ourselves to choose the contexts and craft them appropriately for the audiences. It needs to be inherently human. So yeah.
Perfectly put. Kristin, I want to double click now. Oh, such an awful phrase, excuse me. I want to dig deeper more. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the content that you create and the different, and I know that you've explored Saks Live with live styling sessions, and Jean has actually asked in the questions about live video talks. So I wondered if you could, I know we've heard the digest emails, but some of the other areas that you're exploring, and also how you're prioritizing the channels that you're using, that you're publishing them on. So we can also answer a question from Arkan, just in terms of where your focus is from apps and website.
Yeah, I think that last question is a difficult one, right? Because it is, the more versions of content you create and the more places that you put them, you quickly end up with a lot of capacity that you need to create in order to do that. And I think, one of the ways that we're trying to create more of that capacity is leveraging creators. So influencers, it's sort of an evolution of the influencer strategy, where we are kind of giving up a little bit of the control and partnering with more people to sort of talk to their communities and bring Saks in. And so I think there probably is some element of, we have to be a little bit less precious about our brand and let it evolve, and let people interpret it in the way that they want to, and kind of give up a little bit of that tight control around what the brand is. So I think that's one way to do it. I think, being a little bit more lo-fi, I think, is another way. Everything doesn't have to be glossy, and we can have some more informal content, more, quick creations and things like that, because I think it frankly fits in better in a lot of these platforms. So I think not trying to fight against the platforms themselves and creating content the same way that an individual user, or as close as we can get to how an individual user like you or me would create the content, trying to match that style, I think actually does take a lot of the work out if we were to think about producing all the content in sort of the traditional glossy way that we might have done it. And then live, I think, is another, we also have a live at Saks, and very similar. I think, Robin, you mentioned that you created this during the pandemic as a way to kind of keep connecting with people as we were all sort of adapting to that environment. And we did the same thing. So we said, we used to have tons and tons of physical events, and that's where we really connected with our community. And then we went on an immediate pause where we said there's no physical events. But as we've come back into a place where we're doing lots of events again, we found that there's a really nice place for live in all of these. And so over the last couple of years, we've done over 200 events. And I think one of the nice things is the subjects are very wide, and we've seen people engage on very different subjects. And I think, we tell people what the subject's going to be, who the hosts are going to be, and they can choose to join or not. And if they join, then there's, similar to this, there's live chat, there's interaction. And so if someone wants to join a Saks Live tomorrow, we have a Saks Live with Christian Louboutin, which, access to the designer like that is, a dream for customers who are huge fans, and wouldn't be able to make it to a physical event. So we have that, which you might expect. We have celebrity stylists like Molly Dixon has done some for us, which, helps people just understand, like, how do I wear this? What should I, like, more of the styling, and how do I get access to questions, answers to questions that I might have. But we've also had influencers join and talk about some things that maybe are a little bit less expected and more human, not about sales. So we've had wellness talks, and one we had recently was with Rupal Patel, who's our fashion director, with JJ Martin from Le Double J. Had a couple of sessions just on mindfulness and talking about some things that are very close to their hearts in terms of meditation and mindfulness and how they like think about mental health, and just kind of chatting about that, and people engaged with that in a different way than, you know, it wasn't really about shopping. So I think we've really loved using that as a way to connect in different ways with our customers, and let them kind of connect in whatever way that they want to. And then that content, you know, exists and can be used in YouTube or, you know, other places. But it's just, I think it is a lot of content creation and a lot of playing with different mediums and trying to just jump in and join.
Lydia, before I change tact, is there anything you wanted to add to what Kristin's just said?
Big nods. I agree. It is about that agility and being nimble. And I think it's so tough for like big, especially legacy brands. I think it's tough to be nimble and scrappy in that way. But it was awesome to hear you say that, Kristin, around like lo-fi and, you know, trusting of the community to be the mouthpiece for the brand. It's like, yeah, I just agree. Big agree.
So to turn to the high net worth individuals that are sort of a part of this narrative, shall we say, one of the things that has been striking over the last decade and more, but particularly over the last 5 years, has been quite how impervious to price sensitivity this group of consumers are. Luxury retailers raised prices by 10.7% in 2021, and they've raised prices by 10.3% this year again, and it seems to have had little impact at all on the demand for luxury products. So I wondered, Kristin, when you think about quite how profitable this group of people are and quite how important personalized individual relationships are with individuals, and often, you know, it's not as many individuals as you might think that can drive a significant amount of revenue. You know, how do you view this in the long term? What's the long game, the long play, in order to make sure that Saks is everything they need it to be?
Mm-hmm. A couple of things here. I think one is, you know, we've started using the concept of LTV at Saks. And so one thing I think is, you know, we might be surprised by who the customers are who really have that high LTV potential, especially online, because there's not as many clues. There might not be a personal relationship right at the beginning. And so I think one of the things that we've tried to do is understand, and there's been a lot of data science behind this, but understand what are the cues that we can pick up on, where first purchase behaviors, even at their very first purchase, based on brands or categories that customers may purchase, or behaviors that they take, like whether or not they subscribe for email, whether or not they create an account, all of these different things, what channel they come in through from a marketing perspective. We've modeled to say, what are some of the biggest clues or combinations of clues that tell us that a customer may be high LTV potential? And so instead of in the past, kind of like, you know, years ago, we would have waited to say, oh my goodness, okay, this person has now passed a $10,000 threshold or whatever it is, some marker that was very high, they're a high spending customer. And then they would start to maybe get a lot of perks. They would get exclusive access, and we would make sure that they were matched with a stylist and all of this. But I think like things are moving too quickly, and we can't wait for those customers to identify themselves. So what we've started to do is say, if someone is showing some signs based on the modeling that we've done, that they might be high LTV, we're going to go ahead and start treating them like they're high LTV today, because we don't have a lot of time to capture them and really retain those customers. So from the beginning of our relationship with them, we're trying to put them into, you know, put a little flag that says this person may be one of the high spending customers or a high LTV person for us. And so let's proactively give them special access, even though they haven't spent a lot with us. Let's have them matched with a stylist to make sure that they have a relationship, that someone can help them. We're giving them elevated customer service, any of the things that we can do to help them achieve that potential that we think that they have, and give them those benefits and form that relationship before we see them take that behavior with us.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Lydia, a lot of this conversation at this point has been focused on some of the more operational tactics, but I'd love to hear from you, and it perfectly chimes with one of the questions. I'm sorry to drop you in. It was some slightly more specific requests, but how are ultra high net worth or just high net worth individuals changing in terms of the consumer characteristics or sentiments? And also, do you have any advice or any insight on how best to connect with those individuals, be it through media or other channels? I assume it's very difficult, but you know better than I.
Well, I think more broadly, we need to acknowledge we're in a mass cultural reckoning and awakening. And we've seen that brands can be these incredible vehicles for positive change and destruction. And I think luxury as we know it is kind of being questioned. And I'm a big believer that the web is a powerful tool for good, but it's also a bit of a hellscape mirror of how ugly we are. And I think consumers have never been more awake to that fact. And so it's a tough place to be connected right now. And even more so adding that layer of what possible place might luxury have in that. We actually published a Substack around like anti-capitalist kids, which is like a movement on TikTok rallying against big brands. And those lot may not be buying at that volume or that price, but they are shaping the cultural conversation and the equity of a brand. And the luxury brands that are winning in culture are honestly the ones that are attempting to like redesign and innovate the system from within around them. To the benefit of ethics, their values, and their community. And so it's kind of more that like servant leadership in the brand mission space. Like if you think impact driven as always like demonstrated really potently by like a Nike, or even more like grassroots, the new consumer mindset by like rising disruptors like Telfar, who are using fashion as like a platform to like play with culture. But I think the important note there is that these success stories are all very eyes wide open. There's no hope, like denial has no home here. And I think that's like a really interesting new phase for luxury. So yeah, what I'm trying to land, I suppose, is that it's a bit of a mess, but actually in all of that shared anxiety and realism is truth. And that's really exciting. There's a lot of potential and connectivity inside truth because we're rebuilding from a really sincere place. So yeah, that's really exciting. And I think the luxury consumer will continue to deepen connections with brands who value that realism. And I think it's safe to say that luxury used to be a bit of a hiding place, like, delicious, dreamy denial. But now we're asking this category to bear its values, commit, to its promises in the bones of the operation, because that's where people are looking now too. It's not just the front door. And the consumer will reward that bravery with commitment and loyalty to the product. That's essentially how I think you can connect, is again bearing that realism. And also it's like receipts, like where is the brand showing up for the community in a way that's like incredibly tangible. Yeah.
I did an interview last year with the CEO of a globally leading concierge service, and they were talking about how some of their richest clients were so much more considered about legacy, about experience, about education, yes, the transformative economy, status-driven consumption is evolving. It's certainly not going away, but it is evolving.
Exactly.
Kristin, something that underpins all of those connections is an ability to, create some kind of emotional payoff in the purchase journey somehow. Give people, a good feeling. And as Lydia says, those good feelings are in a way harder to come by as people reckon with the reality of overconsumption, the reality of what we know to be some elements of our beautiful but really quite damaging industry. How do you create those emotional moments, and what's the strategy behind doing so?
Yeah, it is a challenge. I think, particularly online when we don't have as much face-to-face connection. I think that's something that we're facing the challenge of how to do that. I think, Saks Live, which I mentioned, I do think we see a lot of that emotional connection there when we're providing connections directly between people. We see community sort of building and engaging in those sessions. I think it's happening in social. And I think that's why it's important to be really present. And I think we're trying to build it through our stylists, which I think is a little bit old school, but I do think, we see that relationships really can form between stylists and customers, and they start to break off a bit, because, you know, a lot of times when someone is buying something from Saks, you know, it is around a change in their life. So, you know, when we have people reach out about needing styling help, someone who maybe doesn't work with a stylist, it's often, you know, my son is getting married, or I, you know, started a new job, or I lost a lot of weight, or, you know, all of these things where it is sensitive sometimes, or emotional, and there's a lot of real life sort of things surrounding that. And so I think, you know, part of our job is to help people feel more like themselves. It's confidence, it's self-expression. And so I think, you know, we as a company, and especially as our stylists, which I think like online stylists as well as in-store stylists, they are often the face of Saks for a lot of people. I think, you know, we try to approach it with no judgment. We don't want to be like saying this is what to wear and what not to wear. It's more about, you know, what makes you comfortable, like what do you like, what makes you feel good, and how do we help people to kind of be the friend to sort of help them, you know, bring the next phase of themselves, however that is, and to feel really good about it. And so I think that's when people really feel a connection to Saks often, is when we've helped them to, you know, people love when they find something new. It's exciting to have, you know, a new look. But I think a lot of times during these life-changing moments or phases of transition, if we can be there and help them to kind of go through it, I think it's a really nice way to connect, and it is meaningful for customers.
We're running out of time, and I'm going to ask you both about your views on loyalty and, you know, maintaining and creating and nurturing loyalty between companies and consumers. But before I do that, I have two quick fire questions for you, Kristin, from the audience. One is from Claire, and it's about your views on the future of email as a consumer communication channel, as opposed to, you know, and specifically, you know, are Gen Z really utilizing email in a way that perhaps previous cohorts have? And then the second, just so you can maybe think about it while you're answering the other one, is just how do you measure and track the success of different types of content, and how does that inform, I think, the buy and your different tactics in order to get eyeballs on particular products, or what does that sort of situation look like?
Okay, so the first one, love a rapid fire. The first one on email. So, you know, I think we find email is really still highly engaged. Our email list continues to grow. I know there's been a lot of conversation about, you know, what is the future of email, and do people really read their emails anymore, and all of that. But I do think maybe that's an older view of email. I think when you get a personalized email, an email that you know is going to bring value and relevance to you, no matter what generation, as things evolve, like there will be people who continue to read email. And I think, you know, it's probably important for the future of email that we do make it more personalized. So, you know, that's our view. We're seeing great success in email, and I think a lot of that is to do with our personalization efforts there, to make sure we can tailor things as much as humanly possible to what's going to be interesting to customers. But then I also think like there's a translation of email that's even shorter, even quicker. So SMS, push notifications from our app, where it's the same type of messaging that comes in our email, but it's what's the one sentence version of it, or what's the, you know, one image instead of, you know, 5 images might be in an email. So I think the two of those will sort of play together, where text is replacing email in some cases. But I think when it's product and people want to look at it and engage with it and see multiple options, email is still a great medium for that. And then the second question, I've already forgotten.
Tracking content performance and using those insights to drive your commercial strategy.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what we look at for content performance is engagement. So, you know, we can look at sales from content, but I think, like, you know, given what we've talked about, luxury is so inspiring, and it's something that people think about. And so often, you know, it can be very misleading to say, oh, this display image or this video or something like that didn't drive a lot of sales. It probably won't directly drive a lot of sales, but we look at engagement, we look at comments when comments are available, likes, all of those things. And so I think we interpret that pretty loosely, though. We interpret it as, you know, customers engage with things that they're interested in. I think, like, we look to see if, you know, particularly from social, if people are coming in, are they bouncing directly after looking at something, or are they continuing to engage more? Are they adding something to their wish list? So we can try to, like, sort of interpret what type of engagement they're giving us, and what's the intention behind it. Is it that they saw something that looks strange, and so they want to click on it and see what that is, and then they're gone because they're not really interested, or does that sort of, you know, spark their interest? But that's kind of how we're adapting content. I don't think that frankly we make a lot of different, like, buying decisions based on content. I think it's feedback to investigate further. But we might make different merchandising decisions. If something is highly engaged with, put it sort of at the top of the array so other people can find it. We might expose it in more content in other channels because we might say we have a winner here. But I think it's just one of the many signals that we sort of take in.
Sure. Lydia, back to the big picture. You know, views on loyalty, something that is obviously difficult to create or stimulate, shall I say, rather than create artificially, but to stimulate. But I wondered if you could share how you think companies can really connect with consumers in a way that creates a longevity in their relationship, and also any final thoughts you just have on what I think has been a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the future of loyalty and building it between brands and people is about trust. And I think, as I've touched upon, like, I think Web 2 is an inherently transactional space right now. And so with the rise of Web 3, we're seeing a lot of that philosophical underpinning, setting new expectations for consumers in that bridge phase between Web 2 and Web 3. And so, like, decentralized spaces, resource sharing, flat hierarchies, and, like, more niche interests being celebrated, essentially more authentic interactions. And there's this, like, distinct emergence of more private spaces and tighter communities, like platforms like Be Real and, like, Discord rising in popularity, like private accounts and closed groups. It's almost like we're craving that intimacy and specificity, which has kind of been watered down. And I think in that, the future of consumer loyalty is built in those, like, one-to-one interactions, which I know feels very, like, long game, but I do feel like it's, like, worth it, the investment up front now, as this is still rising and building and defining itself. So yeah.
Totally. And I just think, you know, you think about how comments and community works in China and the Chinese, you know, there are so many different ways that this could work in, as opposed to both being watered down and commercialized. I think that's fundamentally, you know, the platform's commercialized it all. And so it just has, I really think that Web3 could really transform how brands communicate with now. I think because we have Web 2 lenses on, we think, oh my goodness, how are you going to hire enough people to have that many conversations? Right. But we just have to reframe how the conversations are going to be had and what that looks like and how you inspire.
And because also it's not about scale. It's like, it really is about that, like, potent, intimate, one-to-one interaction. And that's what's exciting about Web3, I think, is the definitions of authorship and ownership are being kind of broken open. And as brands navigate these new definitions, it's going to be really crucial to securing their place in, like, the next iteration of the internet, essentially. So yeah, I find that really, really interesting.
Totally agree. We've gone from having one face-off to a stable of influencers to now recruiting all of your consumers to be your brand advocates in all the spaces everywhere.
Yeah.
Kristin, what are your final thoughts, including loyalty?
Yeah, I agree with everything Lydia said. I think it is about us providing a value to the consumers more than anything else, and it's value that maybe they can't get other places, and whether that's the co-creation that we talked about, giving them a glimpse behind the curtain, something that's unique and experiential. I think all of those things really will build loyalty. I think, if you strip everything away, it can be a very commoditized, place to be where, they can buy a dress here, they can buy a dress somewhere else. And so it's really all about the other things that we're bringing to the relationship that we have with our customers. And so I think that is personalization. I think it's, experiences, I think access and discovery, and kind of thinking of ourselves as a place that we're meant to help our customers at the end of the day. And that's, going to be crucial for loyalty.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your time and joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've certainly learned something. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Please do check out BOF. There's loads of content on all of these topics. And otherwise, it's just for me to thank Lydia and Kristin for sharing all of their advice and insights with the community. Thank you both so much. It's been great.
Thank you. It's fun.